Perfect.
We'll just give stragglers a minute or two to come in before we get going.
Perfect.
Asia, your background's really on brand with our coloring scheme here.
Isn't it?
Right.
Perfect.
If I was a more talented pianist, I would get on there and play us some elevator music.
Oh, yeah. Like a waiting room music. Yeah.
Save that for another day. Yeah. All right, let's get going. Hello, welcome. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to join us. We're going to be chatting about how contingency firms can best use QuickBooks. As a reminder, at the end of this session, we will do a Q&A. So if you have any questions as we go along, keep that in mind, and we will get to as many as we can at the very end. Today, we are joined by a couple of bona fide experts, and I will give you guys the floor to introduce yourselves.
Thank you, Asia. It's great to be doing this. So those of you who don't know Asia, I see a lot of familiar names in the attendee list. So thanks for joining. Asia joined our team, I think, back in February, right? So we actually have someone to keep us nicely organized on the marketing and communication side. So you'll probably see more from her. And Zac joined the team in October, I believe, right around October, and he's been a CPA, not actively working in that currently, but I joke around and say last year I pretended to be a finance person on a lot of Zoom calls, but it's nice to have an actual finance person running our webinar for today. And just as a little bit of context, when I first launched Mind Skills, it was late summer 2021, and Matthew Galizzi, good friend, and he leads our app development team, is our app CTO. So, hey, we need to build an integration to QuickBooks that removes double entry. Those of you who've been in Fileline for a long time doing contingency work, there was often an expenses section. You had to manually update it. You forget. You get to go to mediation, trial, whatever it might be. And you're like, hey, could somebody run a reconciliation, make sure we've got everything in there before you can get to your settlement numbers. And if all the numbers are in QuickBooks, why not just have them show up in Fileline? So that was the nucleus of the idea. It's since expanded to handle all kinds of workflows for managing expenses, dealing with being able to do check requests, syncing your projects back and forth, between QuickBooks and Fileline. So we'll go through some of that. But the thing we realized was just getting a foundational use of QuickBooks for law firms might be really helpful. Like, how do you manage your trust balances? How do you set up your chart of accounts? Everything that we're going to show today, you can do manually in QuickBooks without needing our integration. Our integration simply automates a lot of that for you. So that's a little bit of context for the details. Feel free to use the Q&A. We will get to that at the end, but definitely load up the questions, and looking forward to diving in. So, Zac, you want to, actually, I could advance this.
Yeah.
Like, this is the two of us, and I'll advance the agenda.
Yeah, I can take it from here. Thanks, Troy. I want to start by just a real intro to QuickBooks. What are your options? Which options are best for you to purchase, and setting up accounts and things like that. So I'll go ahead and share my screen here. Steal it from Troy. Right. So up here, I'm just on the QuickBooks kind of landing page for their different tiered of QuickBooks Online options. They have a simple start option, plus, and advanced. We recommend folks just go ahead and get QuickBooks Online Plus. The main reason is it allows up to 5 users. Simple start, as you can see, just 1 user, so not maybe that useful for a law firm. Additionally, and probably more importantly, we're going to get into how we're organizing client level balances in QuickBooks. And one of the tools we use is based off this feature called Track Profitability. And as you can see, that is first introduced in the QuickBooks Online Plus version. So that's kind of the simple reason why I recommend Plus. There are some reasons to look into Advanced as well for large organizations, but certainly not not necessary for keeping your case costs and your trust balances organized. So moving on. In QuickBooks, we did kind of want to mention also when you get started in QuickBooks, one thing you want to strongly consider when you're adding users, you might have up to 5. You might want to consider what types of permissions those folks have. With QuickBooks Online Plus, you do have some control over that. If I go ahead and add a user here, you'll see that that user can be a standard user, which can give them limited or full-time access, or they can be a company admin with complete access. To narrow that down even further, you can have users that only can view and run reports. You can have users that only track time, and you can have a user that only accept payments. So if you want to use QuickBooks Online, like your collection team wants to use QuickBooks Online, you can give a whole bunch of users access to receive payments without access to the other areas of your accounting ledger. If I click next, you can see, for example, if I give someone access to be in collections and the payment tools, they can either have access to all transactions or just transactions they create. So it's kind of a nice way to allow certain users into QuickBooks to use some useful features, and then make sure that your accountants and your business owners are really the ones driving the financials.
And two common roles with lower permissions for contingency firms. You won't typically be collecting revenue, but you will get deposit checks. So you could have someone who's taking deposits and putting those right in QuickBooks. And then another common low permission role is someone who's given permissions to just write checks same day up to a certain amount. Sometimes that's an issue as well. And then you'll notice, like Zac said, there's an accounting firm access. You can have 2 accountants without using your user licenses.
Yeah, kind of nice. The tax people can get in, do what they want to do. They can run their own reports. That kind of thing can be really useful. Also with QuickBooks Online, one of the obvious benefits is you're in the cloud and not on your own hosted server. So if you're, your tax professional or even your bookkeeping company is, outside of your office, they can easily access it from their web browser. Kind of nice. Awesome. I wanted to move on to the chart of accounts here. There's a couple key accounts I want to discuss that are specific to contingency law firm workflows. The first revolves around those case costs. So these are those expenses the firm is incurring throughout court casework, and you're expecting to recover all these at settlement. In my ledger, I call these advanced case costs. I use a balance sheet account. It's an other current asset. The reason I do that is because when you're incurring these expenses, because you're expecting to be reimbursed for them, they're not truly a write-off. They don't need to go on the P&L. They can go in and out of the balance sheet and flow through the balance sheet without ever impacting the P&L. It's certainly okay to maintain them in an expense account if you prefer them in the P&L. The way you can create new accounts in QuickBooks Online is we're navigated here to our chart of accounts. We can click on the green button, New. And the first thing we select is what kind of account do we want. So in my case, this was an asset account. You're prompted to say, where do you want to save this account under? So this is just where it's going to show up on your balance sheet. I think other current assets is appropriate for case costs. Tax form selection, we're also going to choose other current assets. And then of course we name it here. And that's all you need to do. You click save and you've got that account made. The other account that I pulled up here, uncollectible case costs. Since my case costs are on the balance sheet, they're not impacting the P&L. I need to make this account in the unfortunate event that a case gets canceled or whatever, and I'm not able to reimburse myself for these expenses. At that time, it's appropriate to move those expenses to the P&L. And so I'd post a journal entry to relieve these costs off my balance sheet account and move them onto my uncollectible case cost account, which is a other business expense or an expense. So it hits the P&L.
And Zac, how does that affect taxes? What are the tax implications for expenses?
Yeah, so as soon as it's uncollectible, it's a true write-off to the firm. So you'd want to include that as a tax write-off. Your advanced case costs, as long as you're expecting to be reimbursed, they're not a tax write-off. So the appropriate spot for them is to stick them on the balance sheet.
Great.
Yeah. A couple other accounts specific to law firms is, of course, trust. With trust accounting, we always have two accounts. We have an asset account, which is your trust bank account. And we have a trust settlement liability account, which you need to create. That trust settlement liability account should always offset the trust asset account exactly. So in trust accounting, anytime you're affecting the cash balance, which is the asset, the bank account here, you're going to also be impacting the other side of that entry, is going to be impacting the liability. That way, these numbers always stay in balance, and that's part of that that required three-way reconciliation for trust accounting. You might notice my numbers don't balance, but this isn't a real law firm, so you can cut me some slack there. When I guess I could show also how to create these accounts in case it's useful.
On the trust settlement one too, that one becomes the ledger that you reconcile it just like a bank account. So you're getting your three-way reconciliation by doing your bank account and your trust settlement account. And it also contains the client level transaction balances. So that's going to be the one that we key off of for all the reports.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So the three parts of your three-way rec are what's the bank account balance, what's your liability balance, and then what is each of your individual client balances. And all three of those, the sum of your client balances plus the liability plus the asset shall equal each other. And we'll get to very soon here, we'll get to how we're having or managing, maintaining client level balances in that trust settlement liability account.
And maybe I could touch on a couple myths about trust accounting in QuickBooks.
Yeah.
So if you talk to the folks at TrustBooks or some of these folks that have third-party trust account management, they can be great, but they'll say, oh, you can't do it in QuickBooks. And I've heard people think that. It's not true at all. And you do it right in that trust settlement account. It's reconciled. It's perfect. You can have red flag reports for anything that would have a negative balance at a client level, and all of it is there connected to your bank feed. So that's one thing, just if you haven't done it. Another thing that we sometimes see, we see it less and less now with law firms, is that they were somehow maybe coached to create actual individual sub accounts for each client. So every time they have a new client with a trust balance, they would take that trust settlement, create a sub one for the client, and manage things on an individual basis. That's a more complicated way to do it. You run out of available fields in your ledger. It's manually maintained, and it doesn't really give you any additional. It shows in this view. You can see it in this view, but you can also see this in a report. So we just use the report view. That works great, and then everything is kind of operating optimally. If you are watching this and you realize, I'm not doing it like this, there's lots of paths to kind of get on board with having your trust settlement account there and reconciled with your bank account.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We have noticed that is a fairly common technique for early adopters of QuickBooks Online. I think because a number of years ago, the methods we're about to show you were probably not available at that time. And so this was, making sub accounts was a workaround that had to be done. But QuickBooks Online has come a long way, and it certainly has the tools to do a better job at that. Yeah, before we move on to specifically managing client balances, I did want to touch on one really useful feature of QuickBooks Online, which is the live bank feed. I'm just going to switch accounts real quick and demonstrate an actual live bank feed here. If any of you all are working in QuickBooks Desktop right now, you might be familiar with kind of the process for your monthly cash reconciliations of doing sort of downloading an Excel report from your bank, uploading it into QuickBooks Desktop, and then matching everything. QuickBooks Online automates that with a live bank feed sync. And so when you connect your business operating account, your trust account, your credit card accounts, the charges that are coming through the bank and clearing show up in QuickBooks sort of as an ongoing to-do list. And it's a really efficient way to kind of reconcile cash on an ongoing basis. It has some other really nice features. You can see here, there's this cash transaction has flowed in from my bank. It's a real one. QuickBooks has already identified a match. So a transaction that already exists in my accounting ledger that, if matched to this bank transaction, would instantly, reconcile that item. So I can click in and review that match, and sure enough, it's a check. It's a $2,500 check. We'll go ahead and click match, and the accounting is done. At the end of the month, when I go to reconcile cash, it's so easy. I just put in my ending bank balance from my statement. QuickBooks already knows what has cleared because of the bank feed. And since I've already been matching everything, I can reconcile cash in, 10 seconds. So pretty useful.
And that works with most banks. You can create bank feeds, credit card feeds as well. So if you have a company card, you can have 20 employees, all with their own cards. That's fine. Everything still flows into one bank feed. You reconcile it that way. We're not going to get into there's some more automated tools to help manage that as well. But you can have a bank feed for anything that you're needing to pull into your QuickBooks. And you would typically have an operations account and a trust account at a minimum, and you probably also have a credit card account.
Mm-hmm. Any and all accounts you have, get them in there, get the live sync. It'll be really time efficient, and you'll be taking advantage of one of the best things about QuickBooks Online. Awesome. So moving on to how are we organizing those client level balances in QuickBooks? So we'll start with case costs, but for both case costs and trust balances, we're going to leverage a customer or client list in QuickBooks here. So within QuickBooks, with our automation, we can actually create a customer list for you based on all your open projects in file line. Without the automation, maybe you already have a customer case list in here. That works just fine. This is the feature that QuickBooks Online Plus unlocks. But if I go into my settings and I go to account settings and I go to expenses here, you'll see there's a setting here called track expenses and items by client. I highlighted that bad, but there it is. I have that on. So what that does is it gives me the ability to tag from my client list in any transaction I make in QuickBooks. So that would include a journal entry, which might look like this. You can see there's the name field. This is pulling from my client list. Similarly, if I am making an expense transaction, maybe this was a credit card swipe, my payment account's a credit card. Maybe I'm paying for a health record or something like that. I'm taking advanced case costs as we demonstrated before. That's my general ledger account I'm using to manage these case costs. Let's see, health record. Maybe it was $101. I'm always taking from my client list. Hardware slip and fall, for example. So this is a project that's a case that's live in file line right now, and I'm taking it right here on this expense.
Before you click save,
yeah,
it's fine on that screen.
I can go back in.
There was a place where you could upload an attachment. And so you could think of using QuickBooks as your audit ready tool. So if you have a supporting document, you can add it right there. Everything's in context. If you were to use our QuickBooks integration, you can create those checks or expense requests inside FileLine, and they push over and they look just like this. And it includes the attachment you attached in FileLine. So it just automates what you can do here manually.
Exactly. Super useful. It's nice to have that record for the accountants to have that record in QuickBooks so they can do that review for, is the dollar amount right? Is it a valid business expense? All that kind of review, second level review can be done right in QuickBooks, which is nice. We'll come back to the submit and try some other transactions out, but I want to demonstrate how we're creating a nice, useful report to organize these case costs by balance, these client balances for case costs. So I'm going to navigate over to my reports, and I'm actually just going to start with a standard balance sheet. And I'm going to go ahead and find my advanced case cost account. It's right here, $120,000. I'm going to click into the dollar amount, essentially just to get a full ledger of this account. I'm going to switch to classic view because I'm an old dog. In the report period here, I'm going to change this to all dates, and then I'm going to group by client. When I do that, this is taking all my transaction history that's hitting advanced case costs, and it's grouping it by whatever client I take to each transaction. And so as I scroll here, you can see my case cost history is nicely organized by each of my open file line cases, including a bolded total. One thing I like to do, I like to clean this up a little bit because some of these columns aren't that useful, and it fits on a better page if we remove balance, split. We can remove account because we know it's case costs. When we do that, it fits on on your screen a little better. And then if you save this, call it advanced case costs by client. And you click save. I won't because I already have it. You can always come back to it. You can come back to it in the custom report section. So you can see advanced case cost by client shows up right here. And I can always go back into it and check. If you're a larger firm, this list can get pretty large. And so you can always come in here and filter on a specific client if you want. So you can bring in client. I'm going to find that one I just tagged right here. I guess if I can't spell Hogwarts, I might not be that good of a fan, but so I'm filtering just on this Hogwarts example case, and you can see that $101 expense that we just keyed in together is showing, and that is the only case cost balance for this client right now.
And this is the way that a lot of firms using QuickBooks already, including, you know, the way I did it to help a firm before we had the integration. And I was like, wow, the data is there in QuickBooks. And we would run this report when there would be a settlement event or mediation, you know, save it to PDF. And that would be how we track the case costs down to the penny. What's nice too is sometimes you go into settlement and there's an expert witness that didn't have to deliver services and they give a refund. That refund comes into your bank feed or your QuickBooks. And so it's automatically, you know, you don't have to remember to go to file line and manually enter all those little details that could be off.
Exactly. Yeah, this essentially becomes a live and accurate and complete case cost sheet.
QuickBooks has the ability to send reports on an automated basis too, so you can schedule those reports if you want them delivered someplace, like your file by mail room or whatnot.
Yeah, that's true. I could demonstrate that. So this would be a way to just email it. Let's see how you do that again. Oh, you do it from here. So you can see here this report is unscheduled for email. I can go and I guess I do go back to editing it. Oh, I click edit here and I can set email schedule on. I can receive this daily, weekly, monthly, and I can even have a specific custom message in that email.
If you were a small firm just getting started and you want to keep things simple and not pay for an automation or integration, you just have that hit your mailroom every week, and everyone on the local side has access to see case costs. They would just go there and find the most recent attachment. Or you could send it to a specific case cost project, and that would be where it gets sent. And
yeah, that's a good idea. I'm just showing
it's like, how do you keep the legal team 100% in file line and just get them the information they need out of QuickBooks, and keep the finance team in QuickBooks so they're processing the bank fee, they're issuing checks. That works really well when you get on track with that.
Awesome. So going back to other options for case costs, we did an expense first. All these different transaction types work for this method. Right here, we can draft a check in a similar way to the expense. Obviously, a check has not been paid yet, but needs to be paid, as opposed to a credit card has been paid and just needs to be reported. So again, we're taking case costs, $102 Hogwarts. One key thing here is we have print later checked. And so when you have print later checked, this check shows up in your print queue. So that would be useful if you're printing physical checks out of QuickBooks Online. If you're using that feature, it can be really handy. Alternatively, if you just want to record this check in your ledger, but you want to handwrite a check, you can uncheck print and type in your own check number. Simple as that. Similar to that, you can also, a bill transaction also goes nicely, works nicely with this method. Obviously there's a bill date, due date. Not sure why these auto populated here, but we'll go ahead and do a case cost line item. Example bill. Do $3 this time. And of course, always taking that file line project. Yeah, saving close. So the useful thing about a bill is a bill is useful when you want to, it's kind of a cash flow tool, right? You don't have to pay it until the due date, and you can pay it however you want or however the vendor allows. So it sometimes can be useful as an alternative to a check or a credit card transaction.
The other, yeah. So maybe a couple things in there. One would be the report you saw where you see advanced case cost by client. it's a great monthly report before you close out your month to take a look at that and make sure that every case cost was assigned to a client. And then you have 100% certainty you're not missing any costs. Similarly, Zac could show you build the exact same report, keyed off of your trust settlement account. And then you know that every trust transaction was tagged to a client. So those are your quality assurance checks that you can run to make sure.
Exactly. Let's probably, let me demonstrate that here in a second. I think that's a really important part of this process. But just quickly, you can see the check and the bill also showed up in my total case cost balance for this client on my cost sheet. If I go back to my custom reports and just run the unfiltered advanced case costs, one of the things Troy was getting at there was occasionally it might be the case that some checks, bills, expenses sneak into your ledger untagged to a case, untagged to a file bind project. Anything in this report, any transaction that's not tagged to a file bind project will show up under this not specified header. And so it's a great management review control to come in here regularly, run this report and check for these not specified items. Anything in this list, isn't going to be in a case's cost sheet. And so you shouldn't expect to recover it. So it either shouldn't be a case cost or we should figure out which case it belongs to and go ahead and take it to a case. You can always, from QuickBooks Online Reports, you can always click in and take the case really easy, save and close. So as soon as I do that, it's gonna make me scroll to the bottom again. As soon as I do that, you can see that $23 expense is out of the not specified section and it's back up in the Hogwarts case.
That's great.
Do
you want to show the deposit of let's say an insurance check into the trust account?
I do. Let me demonstrate Expensify real quick since we're kind of on a case cost theme. So
one of the other credit, yeah.
This isn't part of the integration or anything we sell, but there's a whole bunch of tools out there, credit card spend tools for companies. Generally, what they do is they sync your credit card charges into their software as well, and they create expense reports that the card holder is responsible for filling out, which is a really nice way to put that responsibility of a card holder on saying, hey, this is a case cost and it's for this case, because nobody else really knows that except for the person who swiped the credit card. So these tools are really handy and they work really nice with this same method that we're demonstrating here for case costs. So if I go into Expensify, we won't get too into this, but this is an expense report. If I want to add an expense for a case cost, I can simply come in here. I can find CX Health or create CX Health. Maybe it was $54, something like that. As long as I'm finding and tagging advanced case costs, my general ledger account for case costs, and I'm also finding that file bind project. This one actually isn't attached to the same, so I'm going to take a different case. But as long as I'm hitting, when I'm hitting case costs, I'm also hitting the open case. This transaction is going to sync nicely into QuickBooks, already included in that client's balance. So a lot of other third-party tools work well. Bill.com works well. That's a common one we see our clients use as well. So.
And this sounds like a huge endorsement of Expensify. It kind of is. We don't have any arrangement with them or anything, but it's one of the few technology rollouts where people thank you right away, because it gets rid of the whole fire drill of what's the credit card statement, who charged what, and everyone has their own card. They don't share numbers, which is more secure. When an employee leaves, their card is deactivated. And then what's great too, there's a really elegant app. You can, if you're an attorney and you're at lunch, you just snap receipts or parking receipts. It goes right in where it's supposed to. You can also forward from your email any receipts you get. So a county courthouse receipt, just forward it in to receipts@expensify.com, and then you tag it the way that Zac showed, and then automatically it's in QuickBooks. And if it's in QuickBooks, it's a case cost. So you're not missing anything, and really speeds up that time getting all your case costs in there.
And it's pretty cheap. Like Expensify is only $9 a month for any user who actually had an expense that month. If they don't, I don't think there's a charge.
Yep.
There's other companies out there doing it where the software is free if you open your credit card account through them. So it can be as cheap as free and still be incredibly useful. Expensify, your existing credit card can sync into Expensify, so you don't have to change accounts or anything.
If you're a managing partner here and you got your Amex card and you want to get all the points, you can with Expensify, you can do that. Have employee cards on your main account and accrue the points. If you use Divvy and some of the others, you'll have to use their card. Expensify also has their own built-in card. There's some incentives to use it that lower the user fees. We do that at VineSkills. Everyone's got an Expensify card, partly because we want them to know the workflow that you all are probably also experimenting with or using.
Yeah, super handy. Okay, moving on to trust deposits. We are going to manage trust balances by client in a very similar way we're going to take from the customer list. For example, in that Hogwarts case, if we received a big hearty check in the mail for that settlement, we're going to record a bank deposit. That deposit, obviously, we're going to deposit it into our trust bank account. And as always, we're taking our Filevine project right here. So we're taking Hogwarts there. And as always, anytime we're hitting that asset account, the bank, we are also hitting the trust liability account. So I'm going to check. Check. Just to record. I record it. We'll say $1,000 on this one. Maybe that might be a small settlement for you all, but for spirit of example. And of course, any of these transactions in QuickBooks, you can attach a copy of the check, copy of the signed settlement statement, whatever is useful. As soon as we save and close this transaction, we now have a $1,000 trust balance associated with this case specifically. And we're going to create a report to see that, very similar to the case cost report that we just showed you. I'm going to start with the balance sheet. I'm going to find my trust settlement liability account here. I'm going to click into it, switch to classic view. And of course, we're doing all dates and we're going to group by client. When we do that, it just looks just like the case cost report. We've got a nice transaction history of each of these trust transactions, and we've got a nice bolded trust balance total. That was a terrible example because that one's negative, unfortunately. But we're going to do the same thing. We're going to change columns. We're going to remove balance, split an account, just kind of clean this thing up. And we're going to make sure we save this for future use. So we can call this trust settlement. Maybe trust settlement by client, whatever is useful, and save. One other thing I didn't mention before is you can share any of these custom reports you create. You can share with everyone in your organization. And so when you do that, and they go to their custom report section, see how these say shared, they'll have the same copy of the report you built. So everyone's working on the same report, which is kind of a nice touch there. Going back here, I'm gonna go ahead and filter on my specific case to kind of demonstrate the trust ledger for this specific example here. So we can see that we have a $1,000 trust balance for this specific case ready to go. If you remember, we also have, I'll just pull this up too. We also have a case cost balance. $329. So there's both are really useful client level balances right there in QuickBooks. What we can do now is kind of demonstrate now, maybe the case is closed, it's settled. Well, it definitely has, right, because we received the settlement check. So let's go ahead and write some disbursement checks.
And when you click customize, you have a filter for uncleared. And you want to mention, as you're going on through the life of your firm, you'll have lots of cases that have settled. So your trust transaction list will grow. And so by not seeing the ones that have been cleared, clearing is kind of part of that reconciliation process. You'll only clear when you've gotten the case settled and done, and your trust balance is zero. So you've zeroed out everything, everything's paid out. You will mark those transactions as cleared for those clients. And then your list stays nice and tidy of just things that are in settlement phase.
Yeah, that's a good point. Forgot to mention that. Yeah, that can be really useful. You can filter off that cleared status to because essentially what Troy's getting at is you might have a client where they have a whole bunch of historical activity, but the ending balance is 0. If you don't filter on cleared, all that activity is going to show up still, and so your report's just going to get bigger every day you're in business. So that's kind of the idea there. Okay, so disbursement. Out of trust. Most firms are writing checks for this, especially if the money's going to the client for maybe for their award. When we're drafting a check for disbursement, we're of course writing it to be written out of that trust bank account. And we are going to pay the client. Maybe we'll say the client's name is Colin. I don't know. So we're writing this check from the trust bank account. Of course, anytime we're affecting our asset account, the trust bank account here, we're also always tagging our trust settlement liability. I know I've said that a million times, but it's important. So this is the client award check. And of course, I'm tagging the file line case every time. So I can print this, mail this check out. I can handwrite a check, put in my own check reference here, whatever way you want to do it. When we do this and we refresh on our trust settlement report, go ahead and filter on this client again. We can see that check reduced the client's balance to $900. So there's our remaining amount. And so the next step is maybe you write a similar check to pay off medicals, pay off a lien, maybe a prior attorney on the case, and hand it over to you. I'll do one more check. I'll demonstrate one more check. This is the check that you're going to write yourself. This check is going to do 2 things. It's going to recognize your fees as income in QuickBooks, and it's also going to remove that case cost balance off the balance sheet. So we'll use a couple lines here. So we can pay ourselves. I think I have yourself in here. It's kind of goofy, but you would pay yourself this check. You have 2 line items. The first is that advanced case costs. So reimbursed costs, something like that. And I think we had $329 balance. Of course, always tagging file line project here. We're going to have a second line item for the income. Which, do I have a good income account? We'll call it other income, but really be like, attorney services income. So this is attorneys fees recognized. And so what's the math there?
333, something like that. It's 33% of the $1,000 settlement.
Oh, I was just gonna do the remaining amount.
Oh, I see.
That's fine. Yeah, we can. That's fine. We don't need to do the exact math. So we'll do like a $300 fee there.
Yeah. And you'll all that data, by the way, is sitting in file line too. So you'll know what your attorney's fees are as it's calculated. There's lots of questions, but on the file line side, we like to have a disbursement sheet for the client, and sometimes even an internal disbursement sheet that lets your accountant know if they're outsourced or internal. Here's the use of funds that allows you to create that transaction accurately.
Yeah, and we can probably get into that shortly here. Oh, no, the wrong one. So in case costs, you should see. Oh, I'm sorry. So I kind of screwed up there. Let me just remove that check. Okay, so I'm sorry about that. So I did kind of scribble the accounting there. When you're writing that check out of the trust account, you are hitting the trust liability account. And I mentioned that before. So anytime we're hitting the asset, we're hitting liability. I broke my own rules just a moment ago. So we're going to write this check for $629. And this line item is going to reduce the trust balance. Okay, so when I write this check and I go to my trust settlement report, you can see my trust balance reduced to $271 remains. So there's that $629 check. The other side of that, where we're going to relieve case costs and we're also going to recognize our income, that's going to be when we deposit that check that we wrote ourselves. Okay. So I'm going to do a bank deposit for that. We're going to deposit that into operating. We're taking our file bind project, of course.
And Zac, if you don't want to write checks, they could also transfer the money and do a journal entry.
Absolutely, yes. You can transfer the money and post a journal entry that records this same kind of accounting. So our case costs were $329. Our attorney's fees were $300. So we can do, case costs, fees earned. Now, when I save and close, we already saw that the trust balance was correct. If I go back and we look at the case cost balance for this client, we can see that case cost balance was removed to zero.
Nice.
Yeah, so that's, sorry about the mistake there, but hopefully that makes sense. Cool.
That's great.
Yeah, so we could go ahead and maybe now we take a look in FileVine and see what the integration has automated as far as balances.
And I imagine most people on the call spend more time in FileVine than QuickBooks, so that might have been screens you weren't as familiar with, but hopefully that demystified the accounting side. And then over here you can see, and just in summary too, you have your case opening process. So you open a case. As soon as it goes from a lead to an actual client, you'll want to either manually create that same client in QuickBooks or use our automation to create it. And then when you archive a case, you'll want to, and you know that the settlement's down to zero, the case costs are zero, you've kind of followed your checklist. You'll see an example of our checklist here on the screen. Then you can archive it in FileVine and activate it in QuickBooks. That way QuickBooks always has an exact mirror of your open cases, and that makes your accounting really easy. And that exact mirror of open cases, that's that drop-down list, that flows to any third-party tools connected to QuickBooks. So if you're using Bill.com or Expensify or Divvy, that's what makes those integrations work elegantly, is that we're syncing it all back to FileVine. So hopefully that framework simplifies it. And then all the numbers key around case costs and trust settlement, but they're tied to those core clients that we're syncing back and forth, or that you're manually creating back and forth.
Yeah, so as you can see here, as Troy mentioned, we're bringing that case cost balance right into QuickBooks for you. Your legal team can pull their own cost sheet with this button. It generates its own Excel out of FileVine. It's ready to be client facing, and you can attach it to your formal settlement statement as that extra level of detail. If that's helpful, go ahead and open it up. So it looks like this. We can see an itemized detail of each of those expenses that we recorded, and then also the the disbursement coming out of that balance right there in FileVine. Similarly, for trust, we have a trust account section. It looks like this. You can see it's bringing in that remaining $271 balance in trust. Very similar to case costs, your FileVine users can pull their own detailed report here and see what was the history behind that trust balance, what were the ins and outs. That's available. And then we have a couple other tools available with the integration where your legal team can initiate some of these case cost transactions and disbursement checks right in FileVine. So there's what we have here is a trust check request. Your legal team can fill out the details of a disbursement. One of the really nice features, they can attach a signed settlement statement or support for this disbursement right in FileVine. That pushes, with the integration, that pushes a check right into QuickBooks for you. That would look something like this. By default, that trust check would be drafted out of your trust bank account. By default, it would be hitting your trust settlement liability and the FileVine project that it came from. So that way, any of these checks that your legal team's initiating in FileVine, the accounting for those balances happens immediately and is reflected accurately in FileVine as well.
You want to show, if it's a trust settlement process, you can queue up multiple trust checks and not actually pushed them to QuickBooks yet. So you can kind of do the pre-planning. It's a little different than the expense check request section that Zac might show. So you can kind of keep it up, be all ready for the disbursement date. And then, yeah, there's the toggle when you're ready to create them. Now they'll get created in QuickBooks and be reflected in your transactions. And then right below there, trying to, again, keep legal team in Filevine, finance team in QuickBooks, you've got the status. So when that's created, the drop-down list will automatically change to created. I don't know if you can, and then when it's printed in QuickBooks, it'll have the date printed as well as the check number. So you've got that really nice kind of verification of your trust checks, and here's the number, and you don't have to be bothering the finance person for those details.
Yeah.
Then the check request is almost identical, but the section on the left.
Yeah. Should we just go right to the expense request one?
Sure, we could do that. Well, the check request is if you're still very, very check driven, you're not using as many credit cards, you're not doing bills, you just want to do one-off checks. We have a real simple check request, but the expense request, this is our version 2.0. So you could do just a check, the amount, the vendor, those are required fields. You can go ahead and drive, and I don't mean to steal.
Sure. Yeah. So this looks really similar to the trust check request. The main difference with expense request is the accounting. So the accounting in QuickBooks, these checks are gonna push over. I'll pull up an example one. I guess this was a check where you're up, but these checks are gonna push over. That's an expense. Mistake. They're going to push over by default tag to whatever your case cost account is, and by default tag to that Filevine project they came from. So similar to the trust checks, these checks are increasing the case cost balance for your client as soon as they're drafted. With this section, your legal team can also log a credit card charge. So this is useful if you don't get something like Expensify, you don't want another software. You can have your card owners record their credit card charges right in Filevine. These push over as expense site transactions, like this. So they would show up like this. They'd be assigned to that credit card, automatically taking case cost, automatically taking the Filevine project they came from, automatically incrementing the case cost balance. The third transaction option is
it's pretty great. The credit card one, it really cuts down on all of the headaches where you're like wondering what this charge is for, because you're, again, in your bank feed, including your credit card feed, it will see all the charges that came in from Filevine and auto match based on dates and amounts. So it's going to save a lot of time if people were to do this. Then your list of things to chase down is a lot shorter when you get your credit card bill. Hopefully it's zero, but I don't know if it's ever zero.
Yeah.
Yes, the expense request feature is new. Someone asked, so yeah, if you've seen it, this is new and exciting for us. But we definitely nerd out on automation and finance stuff, so it's good.
Yeah, and if you already have the integration, you're already live with it, just reach out to me and we can hook you up with this new feature. It's included in your current license.
Yeah. The attachment, again, I know it's a little bit repetitive, but attaching that pushes it to QuickBooks. So your finance team has supporting documentation. That's great. There's an email button at the bottom. The email button, after you save it, it'll be there. The email button's just a little extra. Like if you wanted to say, hey, this needs to go out FedEx, or here's unique information, it saves you a few clicks by drafting your email and having a link directly to that collection item. So then the accounting person can go right into that collection item and process this the way that you've instructed them to based on the email that you sent. So just trying to keep the communication really flow nicely here. That's good.
Do we have some Q&A questions?
We do, yeah. So there's a couple. One from Pat. It mentioned, we're looking for a software that can do both the accounting and the case management stuff. Do you know of any? So I can take that question. As we see kind of the legal industry embracing more technology, there's great accounting solutions. QuickBooks, online being kind of the premier, most commonly used. accounting platform. And it has so many features in it when you look at, payroll and just managing your office expenses and dealing with all of your accounting needs when we've generally seen some case management tools that try to incorporate some light accounting, and they just miss it. They don't do it really well. So really what we're seeing is the way to go would be, let's just take, the best of both. We got file buying with project management, document management, obviously case management, and then connecting it really well to file buy to QuickBooks. Being a good way to go. So no, I don't know of any that try to do everything, and I don't know that I'd recommend it. And there's more. We're going to do another webinar if you also handle time and billing. That'll be a separate webinar where we go through that workflow. But for contingency stuff, this is a real slam dunk for making that work. We've been doing this for a while. I think the settlement section is a really good one to demo if we have a minute, and then I know we need to wrap up soon. Just even to show that screen, Zach.
Yeah. Let me go back to this one.
So maybe put in like 40% for your fee agreement. Yeah. Do you have co-counsel or not? Hide fields you don't need. The nice part is all this is math driven and goes to like an internal settlement sheet that your finance team can know what to do with, or you if you're the finance person. Was there a prior attorney? You might not need all these things, but if you need to reimburse a prior attorney that referred this into you because they incurred some initial case costs, you can incorporate that into your internal disbursement. And then right below that, the QuickBooks case costs. So this is where you would see the actual case costs that have come in from QuickBooks. If you hit refresh on this, does it show?
It's 0 because we already dispersed out of it.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So you would see your case costs there. The link to detailed transactions is an Excel report that shows you all the detailed line items that accumulated to get to that case cost, which is great. You don't have to go to QuickBooks for it. It syncs every night or via that button, and pretty soon we'll have it sync real time. So we'll remove those fields. And then other case costs would be soft costs. So if you have printer fees or admin fees, things like that are not part of your financial transactions in QuickBooks, you can add those. Sometimes people use that for case financing. You can redo the labels, but it's just an example of where you could capture those soft costs. And then there's a calculated field for total case costs. All the other ones are calculated fields as well. And then below, we've built this so you can handle multiple settlements. So you pick the number of settlements, and all on screen, all of the calculation fields function. You can pick the first settlement type. And the structure of this layout, you could change it to be whatever you want. We can give this to you as part of our integration. It's free, it's fine if you like this settlement better than the one you're using. But the idea here is you can have multiple settlements, but one disbursement. And then at the very bottom, you'll see is where we have our nice Fusion report that gets you your client settlement statement, pulls in unpaid medicals, unpaid liens, and then buttons it all up into a nice client-facing document. You can also have an internal one if you want to have a version that pulls in co-counsel fees, even things like attorney bonuses or case manager bonuses, things like that. And then last but not least, at the very bottom, we are fans of checklists. So you may have one that's settlement oriented, which is more legal team, payments oriented, more finance team. Let's make sure we check all those boxes. Check boxes are reportable as well. All your projects in the settlement phase. Let's see how close we are to wrapping those up before you archive them. So that's a little bit of the flow of what we see as real common for contingency firms. And hopefully you get an idea of if you're living in file buying, you see where your QuickBooks data should land if you're using an automation. If not, you just, ask the finance person to run that report that you saw Zac demo, and that becomes the backup data you can use to get to the settlement event. Awesome. I'm going to read through some Q&A. We didn't think we would take the entire hour, but it looks like we're about there. So there's a question on, is there a way to control which file users can push a check request through to QuickBooks, or alternatively, how does accounting do a review? So accounting will definitely do a review. So those checks are in a queue. They're not printed. They're in a queue. The supporting document is attached. I like to make that a required field. So they are reviewing those before they approve them. If they choose to void the check, they void it. It shows voided back in FileVine as well using our expense request section.
Yeah, and I think one thing to clarify, those checks will be reviewed. As soon as they are drafted, the accounting happens though. So, you know, as soon as that check hits QuickBooks, the case costs are incremented. Upon review, if you void it, you know, that removes the case costs from the balance. And so, yeah, I don't know if there's some permissions on the FileVine side that can kind of limit who sees check request, or if we, you know, the initially hit in or that kind of thing, Troy.
Yeah, there's probably not yet right now.
Okay.
If you have access to a project, you have access to a project. So you're going to be able to see it, click buttons.
Okay.
There's a question about archiving or making inactive in QuickBooks that you couldn't see a report after it was archived in QuickBooks. So in QuickBooks, it doesn't use the term archive, it uses inactive. Nothing's ever deleted, but if you show your QuickBooks screen and maybe just go to client list.
Yeah.
Right in the little gear icon, you can see inactive clients anytime you want, and you can still pull them up. They're just no longer available in the drop-down list of like writing checks and things like that to create transactions. You can easily unarchive it as well. You just go into the detail. If you realize you archived in FileVine a little too soon, you had some more transactions to post, you just you activate it again.
You can click make active.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The little nuance, if you do use our integration, if we see that there's an open trust balance or in time and billing, if there's open invoices, we don't inactivate it in QuickBooks. We keep checking every 30 days to make sure you've gotten those to zero balances and that we inactivate it so it reflects the archive project in FileVine.
And if you have activity on a deleted customer in these reports, I believe it should still show up. I don't know if I have an example of that in here, maybe not.
Yeah,
but it'll still show up because you had real activity in your ledger, so that will still show up. It will just say, it'll have this naming convention for that case, and then in parentheses, it will say deleted, but the activity will remain in this report.
Yeah. Well, thank you. We should probably wrap up, and we're happy to chat. You can reach out to us directly through vineskills.com. Click any of the buttons to say let's connect, and we will be happy to chat with you then. We also have quite a few free resources. If you like the learning and want to do more, down here at the bottom, we've got a library of training videos. Some of them have to do with QuickBooks and settlement process. We have free help every Wednesday. It's live help, organized by topic. You can sign up to get a reminder to join, and we'll send you a recap after this webinar with a video recording of this, as well as links to these free resources.
Thank you all for showing up and being interested in accounting. Love to see it.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining.
Take care.
Alrighty, bye.